they sinned, it was stated that they were naked and unashamed. They were able to commune with God in an open fashion. They were able to be there with God. They were able to be there with each other in an open fashion. They didn't have anything to hide. And it was because they didn't have anything to hide. It was just this open communication they had with one another and with God. And they were very true to themselves, and they weren't ashamed of who they were made to be and the identity that God has made them to be. And I think this moves more into our own personal shame. And in some Ivy books, we read a lot about biblical shame and toxic shame. And so when we look at biblical shame, this is actually from one of the books I read in January called Release from Shame, Moving Beyond the Pain of the Past. The author, Sandra Wilson, she came from a broken home. She was abused and she was sexually assaulted when she was little. And she is, I think it's stated that she is now a psychologist. But in this book, it states, biblical shame is an appropriate, healthy response when we acknowledge that we are different and less than God made us, and that we are separated from Him by our sin. Although we bear the image of God, sin radically altered our fundamental natures. Sin separates us from ourselves as originally created. Sin separates us from our original Creator. And then we just compare that to a definition of toxic shame, which is from, that I've taken from Invitation to Lead by Paul Toka
Naga.
Which he will be at U of M on April 8th, that you guys are invited to come and see him speak. But his definition of toxic shame is the dark feeling that you are flawed as a human being. In spite of your efforts to change, deep inside it feels hopeless because you do not believe that genuine change is truly possible. After all, you did not just make a mistake, you are the mistake. And we're given these two different definitions of what's biblical and what's basically unhealthy. And for me, I had to kind of figure out what is the big difference between the two. And how I saw it was, what I see as biblical shame is the small things in our lives that is more so our behavior. So I just moved to Ann Arbor, and I get mad a lot while driving in Ann Arbor because people just stop at a four-way stop and they don't go for the next 3 turns, and I'm just sitting there like, it's your turn, it's your turn, I'm late, it's your turn. So like that's more so my behavior. I could show a lot more patience. I could give a friendly honk to tell them you can move, but I don't think it would help them if I honked. So, and I guess something more personal for me is the way I communicate with my family as well. It can be seen as biblical shame of when I'm really impatient with them. Especially, my mom and I are so much alike that when we talk with each other, like, it's explosions. Because I'm very stubborn in what I believe, and she's very stubborn in what she believes, and sometimes I just need to give more patience, more grace. I need to be more humble because she is my mother overall. Like, she gave birth to me, and I do need to respect my elders. I do need to respect my mom. And so a lot of times, for me, that is a behavioral thing. I need to humble myself to my mom when she is talking to me and not put my phone down and come back to it 20 minutes later to still hear her talking. And I think, yeah, and then that leads us to more, I guess that, like, for me, paints a picture of what biblical shame is. It's more behavior. It's more behavior that makes us feel ashamed of ourselves. It's not necessarily who we are that makes us ashamed. Whereas toxic shame can be more difficult to really, I guess, describe, because it is more of, for me it's more of, I see myself as flawed because I am worthless. And that is something I actually had to go through a lot of healing over, with my own personal story of feeling worthless because of just what I saw as my identity and what I saw as who God created me. I wasn't always Christian. I became Christian when I joined the fellowship, when we were called Chinese Christian Fellowship. And I didn't accept God until my sophomore year after a band of 06. And I think from that point on, a lot of how I viewed myself in terms of other people, how I viewed myself in terms of what I thought I should be, it wasn't a healthy view. I had a hard time taking compliments. I still have a hard time taking compliments. I'll do like a nervous laugh. I'm like, okay, whatever. But back then, if you ask Ben, if anyone tried to compliment me, I'm like, no, I did a horrible job. Like, I could have done this, I could have done this, and this should have happened, but it didn't happen. And I self-analyze myself a lot. I always think I could do better. And that does stem a lot from my own family life. I am Toisan Canto American. My mom is Cantonese, my dad is Toisanese, and I was born here. And so I've always had this little identity crisis of, who am I, what am I? I'm born in this Chinese family, but I live in a Middle Eastern community, and then I didn't realize my identity until high school, and then I started hearing like all these Asian jokes that made no sense to me, but then made me feel bad about myself. And then I joined the Asian community in college, and then I felt left out, because at that time, the chapter mostly spoke Mandarin, so I was just kind of like, okay, I don't really relate, so I guess that makes me a little inferior to them, so I'm just going to like chill in the corner and whatever. So I've always thought, like within the past few years, I always thought, okay, yeah, I just had identity issues. And actually it wasn't until last night that I realized that it goes beyond identity issues. It goes more towards my family life and the view I always had of my family. I have 3 siblings, and for me, if people ask me what was my family like, I'd always say Marie was the oldest, and she always got to do everything first. Marvin was the youngest, and he always got what he wanted. Marty was the smartest, and he always excelled in everything he did, and then I was just there. I am the 3rd child, so I felt very in limbo, according to my family, because I could never measure up to my older brother, because he was just really smart. My sister is the oldest, so she always had say in what our family would do in terms of vacation, or what my brothers and I had to do in school, and so on. So I became the rebellious child, but not like even rebellious. In 4th grade, my brother and sister did like library aid and service squad. I'm like, no, I'm doing safety patrol. Rebellious. Everything like my brother and sister did was like marked off my list of like, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. So my sister did co-op in high school. My brother went to a math and science center. I did yearbook. My brother went to U of M. My sister went to Central. I went to Michigan State. Like, I didn't even apply because I was like, I'm not going to the same school as them. I refuse to. And I don't want to be compared because that's what I've always been. Because we're actually very close in age. My youngest brother was born in 88. I was born in 87. My brother was born in 85. My sister was born in 84. So we're within this 5-year span. So we have a lot of the same teachers growing up. So I was known as Marie's little sister, Marty's little sister, and then in high school I was Marvin's older sister, which didn't sit well with me, which made me want to disassociate myself a little bit more. And I think in that, it caused a lot of instability in my life. It caused a lot of discrepancy in how I saw relationships and how I saw friendships. I had very few friends growing up in elementary school. And I'm actually no longer friends with any of my elementary school friends as of recently because they were unhealthy. They were not God-centered relationships, whether they were Christian or not. It was very unhealthy for me to be in a friendship with them, and it was very unhealthy for them to be in a friendship with them. And it's something, the funny thing about that is those friendships should have ended 4 years ago. Ben knows that too. I have a lot of abandonment issues because of my family life, because of how I was raised. I was very sheltered. I never went to a friend's house up until middle school. I was not allowed out of my house without my parents or grandparents. Even if I lived by a middle school, I was the third house down from a middle school. I couldn't even ride my bike down there, in a fenced school, unless my grandparents were walking with us. And that's how sheltered I was. I never had fast food until middle school. I never been into a movie until 5th grade, and it was a field trip. And so it just caused it fogged a lot of how I viewed people. And with only my siblings being friends at the time, and just my grandparents and my parents, they believed everything bad on the news. So that was even further, no, you're not going out today. You're not going to play outside today. Sometimes we couldn't play with our neighbors over a fence. So I think just not being in this sociable environment while growing up, it really skewed my view of how I saw people. And so as I grew older and as I became in cliques of friends, or I became friends with people, they were not healthy either. To the extent that I really doubted those friendships. I doubted that they were actually my friends. That in high school, even actually in middle school, I started having thoughts of I bet if I was in a car accident, they wouldn't care. I bet if it was my funeral, they wouldn't care. And these thoughts just continued on to high school and even college sometimes. And it actually wasn't until a couple years ago that I actually shared those thoughts with people, my accountability partners, because it wasn't, for me that was shameful to really admit that I don't think people really care about me if I was in the hospital or if I was hurt or or if I just wasn't in the world anymore. For me, there's this big border of trust, this thick glass of trust that you really have to nudge at to get in. And so a lot of times I would trust people and then no, I don't trust you anymore. But then I'm very good at pretending sometimes. Not that I did it with any of you.